Kendrick Miles was only 13 when a Harvard professor pointed to the back row and said, "You observe, don't interrupt." The whole class watched in silence as the only black kid was publicly exiled. Not because he was late, not because he was loud, but because of how he looked. 2 years later, Kendrick walked back into that same room, wearing a guest lecturer badge. But what he wrote on the board left the entire faculty speechless. And sitting in the front row was the professor's own grandson. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The air inside Harvard's Ivy Bridge Summer Scholars Program crackled with ambition. The corridors smelled of polished wood, expensive cologne, and freshly printed syllabi. Students flooded in with monogrammed luggage and designer backpacks, wearing blazers passed down through generations. These weren't just students, they were legacies. Their surnames were whispered across campus, like incantations. Some bore names carved into the buildings themselves, but Kendrick Miles walked in quietly. 13 years old, wearing pressed khakis his mother bought from a thrift store, and a collared shirt that didn't quite fit around his neck. Kendrick was from another world. He wasn't a legacy. He wasn't even a recruit. He was the recipient of a quiet scholarship created to tick a box, the Urban Outreach Initiative. He wasn't supposed to stand out. He was supposed to be grateful. Still, Kendrick walked into room 204 with a nervous kind of pride. His mother's voice echoed in his head. "Walk in like you belong, baby, even if they act like you don't." Inside the classroom, everything looked older than him. The dark oak bookshelves, the chalkboard framed in brass, the chandelier that cast a golden hue over every seat. Students had already taken their places in the semicircle arrangement. Most of them were white, some Asian, a few racially ambiguous. Kendrick was the only black face. At the front, Professor Reginald Claiborne stood beside a podium. He was a tall, statuesque white man with silver hair combed with precision and a navy bow tie knotted tight at the collar. His reputation preceded him, a conservative intellectual who believed merit had no color, but whose record said otherwise. Kendrick opened the door slowly. Claiborne turned without smiling. "Name?" "Kendrick Miles," he replied, standing up straight. Claiborne glanced down at the clipboard. A pause. "You're late." Kendrick blinked, startled. It was exactly 7. "I thought class started at 8, he began. Claiborne didn't let him finish. "Punctuality, Mr. Miles, is not about the clock, it's about respect." He turned back to the board and scribbled a quote in chalk. "The true sign of intelligence is not knowledge, but imagination." Einstein. The only seat open was near the front, so Kendrick took a step forward. Claiborne didn't turn around. His voice cut the room. "Not there. The back row, Mr. Miles. Observe, don't interrupt." There was no mistaking the command. A quiet hush fell over the class. Kendrick's heart dropped. His feet froze. He looked at the other students, then back at Claiborne, whose back remained turned. No explanation, no context, just cold dismissal. Slowly, Kendrick walked to the back of the room and sat down. The old chair squeaked under him. It was the only mismatched seat in the room, pushed slightly farther from the others, like it was meant to be forgotten. From there, the whiteboard looked dim. The sound echoed oddly. He was, physically and symbolically, out of focus. Claiborne resumed his lecture without missing a beat. Kendrick tried to concentrate, but the embarrassment singed his thoughts. Each equation, each historical reference, bounced off him. All he could think about was the snickering he heard from the front row, the sidelong glances, the way one girl turned her phone slightly to snap a photo of him. He pretended not to notice. He raised his hand once. No response. Twice. Still nothing. The third time, Claiborne looked directly at him, paused and moved on without acknowledgement. The message was clear. He wasn't there to engage, just to witness. At the break, Kendrick walked out to the vending machines and stood awkwardly. Other students clustered in groups, talking about legacy admissions, travel to Europe, AP scores, and early decision applications. No one made eye contact with him. No one said his name. He leaned against the machine, trying to disappear. As he reached into his pocket for change, two voices caught his attention. Just around the corner, two boys from the class were laughing softly. "I mean, did you see Claiborne?" one of them said. "Made him sit in the back like it was night." The other boy snorted. "Yeah, dude doesn't mess around with affirmative action kids. My dad says he's the reason Harvard hasn't gone completely woke." They both laughed. Kendrick stood there, breath caught in his throat. The quarters in his palm felt like lead. The vending machine blinked. He didn't move. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else. A slow, hot fury pressing against the inside of his chest. A quiet promise began forming deep within him. He wouldn't say anything. Not today. Not tomorrow. But he would remember. Every slight. Every comment. Every time someone like Claiborne told someone like him to sit in the back. Because one day they were going to see him. Around the corner, a third voice, older, quieter, muttered, "He does that to every black student. Kid doesn't know yet. But he's just the next one." The next few days moved like a slow grind of invisible gears, each turn coated in polite racism, dressed in expensive fabric. Kendrick tried to adjust. He told himself maybe he was being sensitive. Maybe that first day was just a fluke, a bad start. But with each passing moment, that illusion wore thinner. The signs weren't loud. No one yelled. No one threw slurs. This wasn't the South Kendrick had grown up hearing about in his grandfather's stories. No one spat in his face or barred him from entering. But here, at Harvard, the exclusion came with a smile and a sharpened syllabus. It started with the way people looked past him, not at him. He noticed it first in the study lounge. A group project was forming for a class presentation. Everyone began pairing up. Kendrick stood at the edge of the group, holding his notebook, waiting for a glance of invitation. It never came. Eyes darted away. Pairs formed fast, and he was left standing alone. When Professor Claiborne entered, he simply said, "Mr. Miles, you can work independently." A good exercise in self-discipline. That moment folded into others like it. Students spoke around him during group discussions, cutting over his points or nodding politely, without engagement. When he made a correct observation about a theorem's historical misapplication, Professor Claiborne tilted his head and said, "That's interesting interpretation," then swiftly moved on. At first Kendrick thought maybe he was overreaching. Maybe he wasn't as prepared as he'd thought. Maybe they were smarter, more deserving. Then came the whispers. He overheard them in the library's quiet corners, in dorm lounges when people forgot he was there, even in the shared bathroom when they thought he had his headphones on. "Diversity admission," one girl whispered. "He's not really here for the math. It's optics," another boy snorted. One name came up more than once. Trent Willoughby. Trent was tall, pale, with perfectly gelled blonde hair, and a jawline like a sculpture. His father was an alumnus, his mother a trustee. Kendrick knew because Trent made sure everyone else knew too. Heard he came in on some Atlanta outreach program. Trent told a small crowd in the dorm rec room one evening. "Basically a charity slot. You know how these programs work. Feel-good story. Check the box, then off you go." Kendrick was sitting just behind the vending machine wall. He wasn't supposed to hear it, but he did. Every word. No one corrected Trent. No one said Kendrick's name. The walls of Ivy Bridge were polished, but every surface echoed hierarchy. The more Kendrick tried to blend in, the more the walls seemed to push him out. He raised his hand less often. He stopped going to the dining hall during peak hours. Even Professor Claiborne's lectures now carried a loaded tone. One morning, when the professor explained probability using SAT scores, he made a comment that froze Kendrick in place. "It's fascinating how some students beat the odds, though one must always question whether they understood the odds to begin with." Students laughed. A few turned and glanced toward Kendrick's seat. He didn't look back, but he felt everything. Still, Kendrick didn't quit. He woke up each morning, pressed his shirts, walked to class, and studied until his fingers cramped. He refused to fall behind, even as he was pushed to the margins. He built walls inside himself, strong ones, but not cold. At night, he remembered his mother's voice and his grandfather's photo on the dresser beside his dorm bed. "You ain't gotta answer them," his grandfather once said. "You outwork them, and when that ain't enough, you outlast them." Kendrick stayed quiet. He listened, he observed, and he remembered everything. Then, on the 11th day of the program, something happened that pierced through the quiet cruelty of it all. While working in the computer lab, one evening, Kendrick stayed late. As usual, he was alone, eyes blurred from solving advanced problem sets. Most students had long gone to dinner or social mixers. A cold soda sat beside him, untouched. Suddenly a second-year teaching assistant named Lydia, one of the few who was ever remotely kind, entered, clearly frustrated, tapping furiously at her phone. She dropped a flash drive near his desk. "I'll be back in a second," she muttered. Then she left the room, phone still in hand. Kendrick stared at the flash drive for a moment. His first instinct was to ignore it. But something about her panicked expression, and the folder she'd left open on the screen, made him pause. Curiosity got the better of him. On the screen was an open email draft. The subject line, "Full Borees LOL, affirmative action math." The thread wasn't from Lydia. It had been forwarded to her. He scrolled up. What he saw made his stomach turn. It was a string of internal faculty emails, Claiborne included, mocking a recent black student from the previous summer program who'd submitted a complex math proposal. They picked apart his language, laughed about his grammar, and debated whether urban schools should even teach linear algebra at all. One comment chilled Kendrick to the bone. "If this is the future of calculus, I'm switching to philosophy. Affirmative action math will be the death of logic." Kendrick blinked hard. Claiborne had replied with a laughing emoji. And beneath it one sentence. "Don't worry. I've already made sure this summer's representative stays in the back row." Kendrick's throat closed. His hand shook on the mouse. He wasn't paranoid. He wasn't imagining it. They planned this. They expected him to fail. The program wasn't just elite. It was rigged. He stood quickly, heart pounding in his ears. He unplugged his flash drive and shut off his screen. Lydia hadn't returned. He couldn't risk her seeing his face. He left the lab without a word. Outside, the air was damp and electric. A storm was coming. But inside Kendrick, something sharper had already cracked open. He wasn't going to play their game anymore. As he stepped into the hallway, he caught sight of a framed wall of past Ivy Bridge scholars. In the corner of one photo, partially cropped and almost hidden, was the same black student mentioned in the email thread, wearing a medal, standing beside Claiborne, who was smiling with his hand just over the boy's shoulder, but never touching. The hallway outside the computer lab still hummed faintly with fluorescent light, but Kendrick felt as if something inside him had gone dark. The photo he'd seen, the cropped-out black student, the stiff distance in Professor Claiborne's smile, lingered in his mind long after he walked away. He moved slowly, trying to settle the heaviness in his chest, but every step felt like carrying a secret no one else could see. He wandered the nearly empty first floor of Jefferson Hall. Most students were at dinner or back in their dorms studying for the next day's quizzes. The building had a stillness he wasn't used to. Even his footsteps sounded like they didn't belong. He took a deep breath and turned a corner straight into a tall cleaning cart stacked with sprays and mops. "Whoa, careful there, baby." The voice was warm, unexpectedly so. Kendrick stepped back and looked up. Standing beside the cart was an elderly black woman, with silver-streaked locks pulled into a loose bun. Her brown skin lined with the soft evidence of years lived, and eyes that held a knowledge deeper than her uniform suggested. On her shirt was a faded name patch. "I'm sorry," Kendrick said quickly. "I didn't see." "It's all right. I was the one blocking the whole hallway." She chuckled, moving the cart aside with practiced precision. "You look like you've seen something you wish you hadn't." Kendrick's throat tightened. How could she possibly know that? "I'm fine," he said, though it was clearly a lie. The woman rested both hands on the cart's handle and tilted her head. And I'm the president of Harvard." Kendrick blinked, taken off guard by her humor. She smiled, the soft lines around her eyes deepening. "You new to the program?" she asked. "Yeah. Ivy Bridge Summer Scholars. I figured. You've got that look students get around here when they realize the brochure left out a few chapters." Kendrick couldn't help but let out a short, uneasy laugh. "Something like that." She nodded, and looked at him for a long moment. Not the way the professors looked at him, judging, assessing, doubting. She looked with recognition, as though she'd met him long before he walked into this building. "Well," she finally said, "Evelyn Rhodes. You can call me Ms. Rhodes, Dr. Rhodes, or just Evelyn. Doesn't matter to me anymore." Kendrick frowned. "Doctor?" "Yes, sir," she said with a shrug. "PhD in applied mathematics. If you can believe it. Back in '92, before most of y'all were born." Kendrick stared. She said it casually, without bitterness, but the words punched a hole right through the narrative he'd learned about who belonged at Harvard and who didn't. "You're a mathematician?" he asked, unable to hide his surprise. "Was," she corrected. "Or I guess I still am. You never stop being something just because other people stop seeing it." Kendrick felt something shift inside him. "Why are you?" he began, then stopped himself. He didn't want to sound disrespectful. "Why am I pushing a mop instead of publishing papers?" she finished for him. lifting an eyebrow. Oh, honey, that's a long story. Short version, they said I lacked presence. She made air quotes, her voice mocking the phrase. Didn't fit the image Harvard wanted, so they hired someone else. Someone who looked more predictable. Kendrick didn't need her to elaborate. He already knew what she meant. She turned and began spraying down a nearby window, speaking as she worked. You don't seem like the type they think will last either. Kendrick stiffened. Why would you say that? Because I've been watching you. The words startled him, not in a threatening way, but with an odd sense of being seen for the first time since arriving on campus. Not spying, she added, just noticing. You walk like someone carrying an extra 100 pounds. And I don't mean books. Kendrick swallowed. It's just, the program's harder than I thought. It's not the math that's getting you, she replied gently. It's the people. That simple sentence cracked something open in him. All the whispered insults, the dismissive gestures, the rumors spread by Trent Willoughby suddenly, they weren't figments of his imagination. Someone else saw it too. He didn't realize he'd gone silent until she set down her cloth and faced him directly. You want to sit for a minute? She offered. You look like you need to breathe. He nodded, grateful. She led him into a small unused faculty break room, at the end of the hall. The light flickered slightly, and a humming fridge sat in the corner. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt oddly safe. Kendrick sat. Evelyn remained standing, leaning on her cart. I saw the way Claiborne looked at you that first day, she said softly. He did the same thing to a boy in '95. Another one in '01. Another in '09. Always picks one. Always the black one. Tells him to sit in the back to observe. As if that's not the oldest trick in the book. Kendrick stared at her, stunned. Why doesn't anyone say anything? Oh, baby. Because the people who could speak don't want to lose their seats at the table. And the ones who do speak don't get invited to the table at all. She said it without anger. Only truth. Let me ask you something, she continued. You like math? Kendrick hesitated. But the answer was yes, deeply, instinctively, undeniably. I do. She smiled. I could see it in the way you looked at the screens these past few days. You're not here because you're a diversity slot. You're here because you think in numbers the way some people breathe. He felt heat rise behind his eyes. No one had ever said something like that to him. Eleanor slowly reached behind her cart and pulled out a folded stack of worksheets, yellowed with time, corners soft from use. She handed them to him. These were mine, she said. Problems I wrote years ago. For a class I never got to teach. Kendrick flipped through them, his breath catching. Complex integrals, proofs, theorems, material more advanced than anything Claiborne had shown. But the explanations were handwritten with clarity and precision. I want you to try them, she said. Not for a grade, not for validation, for you. Why? He whispered. Because, she said, leaning closer, I see the same spark in your eyes I saw in mine at your age. And I refuse to let this place put it out. Those words, spoken with gentle finality, carved themselves into him. From that day forward, a new routine formed. Not announced, not discussed, not even consciously planned. But real. After classes, when the halls emptied and the brightness of Harvard dimmed into its nighttime quiet, Kendrick would slip away from the other students and find Evelyn. Sometimes she was in an empty lecture hall. Sometimes in a storage closet, sometimes in the corner of a deserted hallway, wiping down chalk trays, and each time, she paused her work and taught him something alive. They worked by lamplight on whiteboards that hadn't been cleaned in years. They solved problems on scrap paper and cardboard. They whispered through equations like secrets. Evelyn challenged him in ways Claiborne never had, pushing him to see patterns beneath patterns, asking him why instead of whether. She told him stories too. About the first time she solved a differential equation at age 9, about being the only black woman in her graduate program, about giving a dissertation so strong that 3 professors stood to applaud, only to be told later she didn't have the right academic aesthetic. Through those late nights, Kendrick learned more than mathematics. He learned resilience disguised as ritual. He learned how genius could survive in the cracks of institutions that rejected it. He learned that brilliance could be quiet, patient, and underestimated, and still powerful. But their sessions remained hidden. No one knew. Not the faculty, not the students, not even Malcolm Willoughby's mother who funded half the building. Evelyn had become his invisible lifeline, his private rebellion. One evening, After they'd spent 2 hours breaking down a theorem Claiborne claimed no summer student could understand, Evelyn capped her faded dry erase marker and looked at Kendrick with an expression he hadn't seen before. A tired kind of seriousness. "They're going to notice you soon," she said softly. Kendrick frowned. "Notice me how? Bright lights don't stay hidden. And this place doesn't like what it can't control." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're not just keeping up with them anymore, Kendrick. You're surpassing them." He swallowed. The idea felt impossible, but Evelyn said it with certainty. Then she placed a hand on the table between them. "Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was your age." Kendrick leaned in. Her voice softened, but her eyes sharpened with warning. "They will try to break you before you bloom. Be ready." Kendrick froze at her words just as footsteps echoed outside the room, stopping right at the door, followed by someone whispering his name. The knocking on the broom closet door came again, firm, deliberate, close enough to stir dust from the chalkboard behind Kendrick. He looked at Evelyn, eyes wide. She motioned for him to stay still. Outside the door, someone whispered his name once more. Then silence. The handle didn't turn. Whoever it was, they left. Kendrick waited, heartbeat thudding in his ears. When Evelyn finally nodded that it was safe, he exhaled slowly, not yet knowing that what waited on the other side of that silence would soon become a storm that would shatter what little protection he thought he had. A week later, Kendrick sat in room 204, his fingers tapping anxiously on the desk. It was the day of the midterm. Claiborne had assigned a 3-part written test, designed to be solved in class over 3 hours, but he had offered a supplemental take-home section for those who wished to challenge themselves. Kendrick took the challenge. Of course he did. He didn't just complete it. He submitted an additional 4-page supplement outlining alternate solutions for the final problem, ones that applied combinatorics and topology in ways the curriculum hadn't touched. Ellen had helped him refine the logic during their late-night sessions, not giving answers but guiding questions. He'd stayed up until 3 a.m., not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because for the first time the math felt like it was his. He submitted it digitally the next morning, feeling more confident than he ever had. 2 days later, the air in the lecture hall felt thick. Claiborne entered silently, eyes scanning the room with military precision. He didn't speak until he reached the podium. "We have a matter to address," he said coldly. "There is reason to believe one of the submitted papers included significant academic dishonesty. The content far exceeded the student's prior performance." He let the silence stretch. A few students turned to glance at Kendrick. Others simply smirked. Kendrick's throat closed. Claiborne continued. "Given the gravity of this concern, the administration will review all materials. The student in question has been notified." Kendrick didn't need the name. When class ended, an assistant tapped him on the shoulder. "The dean would like to see you. Bring your laptop." His stomach dropped. The office was sterile. The dean, an aging man with tired eyes, never looked Kendrick directly in the eye. A faculty liaison sat beside him. Claiborne was not present. "We've received a complaint," the dean began. "Your supplemental midterm appears unusually advanced for your documented performance thus far." Kendrick blinked. "Documented performance?" The liaison interjected. "We're not accusing you. This is simply a review. But we need to ensure academic integrity." They asked for his laptop. Said it was standard procedure. They didn't offer him legal counsel. They didn't inform his parents. They didn't ask if he had help, just whether the work was his. Kendrick nodded stiffly and handed over the device. They didn't thank him. They didn't tell him when or if he'd get it back. The rumors spread like smoke through dry leaves. By dinner that night, the whispers had reached every corner of the Ivy Bridge campus. Kendrick had cheated. Kendrick had copied some grad student's paper. Kendrick had paid someone. Kendrick had faked it. The fact that Kendrick kept quiet, that he didn't scream or fight or demand a spotlight only made it worse. Trent Willoughby was the loudest voice. "Look, I'm not saying he's dumb," he said in the common room that night, arms spread like he was offering balance. "I'm just saying it doesn't make sense. You don't go from barely participating to rewriting the rules of calculus. Unless..." He let the pause hang. Laughter followed. No one corrected him. Kendrick sat alone in his dorm that night, eyes red from holding everything in. He stared at the photo of his grandfather on the wall. He whispered the only words that made sense. "I didn't do anything wrong." But he couldn't convince himself. Not completely. Not when everyone around him seemed so certain that he didn't belong. Evelyn found out 3 days later. He hadn't told her. He was too ashamed. But she saw it in his slumped shoulders, the quiet way he sat in their usual study spot, not touching the problem set in front of him. "What's going on?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Nothing." She waited. He finally looked up.
"They think I cheated."
Her eyes didn't widen in shock. She just exhaled, slowly.
"Of course they do," she said.
Kendrick looked at her, startled. "They don't believe you're capable," she continued. "Because if you are, then everything they believe about this place, about themselves, starts to unravel." He swallowed hard. "They took my laptop." She nodded. "And they'll take more if you let them. But what can I do? No one believes me." "I do." Her voice was steady, fierce, absolute. "And we're going to find a way to prove it." For the next few days, Evelyn worked behind the scenes. She pulled on the few connections she had left. A retired professor who still had access to some internal systems, a former student who now worked in IT, quietly, discreetly, carefully. Meanwhile, Kendrick tried to survive the stares, the snickers, the professors who skipped over him, the group projects he was excluded from. Every time he raised his hand in class, Claiborne ignored it. Once he even said aloud, "We'll allow more participation once integrity is confirmed." The entire room laughed. Kendrick didn't go to dinner that night, or the next. He ate alone, studied alone. His fire hadn't gone out, but it flickered dangerously low. Then Evelyn called him into the lecture hall late one evening, the same one where he had first been told to sit in the back. The lights were dim. On the projector was a paused video file. She pointed to the screen. "I had a friend pull security footage from the library study rooms," she said. "Timestamps match your submission." She pressed play. There was Kendrick hunched over a desk at 1:37 a.m., furiously scribbling formulas, his laptop open, his notes scattered. The footage had no sound, but it was undeniable. Another clip, 2:52 a.m., Kendrick yawning, eyes red, still working. Another 3:21 a.m., final document open, upload confirmed. Evelyn turned to him. "Tell me again, who said you couldn't have written it?" Kendrick stared, speechless. She handed him a USB drive. "Take this. Don't give it to Claiborne. Give it to the dean, directly. And look him in the eye when you do." He nodded, emotion swelling so hard, he thought he might burst. As he turned to leave, Evelyn called out, "Kendrick?"
He looked back.
This is just the beginning. As Kendrick stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had leaked his cheating accusation to a student blog, and it was going viral. Kendrick stood in the dean's office again, but this time he wasn't the same boy who had entered weeks before with shaking hands and a bowed head. He held the USB drive like a weapon, not of destruction, but of undeniable truth. The dean watched the surveillance footage in complete silence. Frame after frame showed Kendrick alone in the library, his face tired but focused, his body hunched over equations that refused to be conquered in a single draft. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the submission logs. When the final clip faded to black, the dean sat back slowly, steepling his fingers. "Well," he said, voice unusually quiet, "this certainly clarifies things." Kendrick said nothing. "We'll notify the faculty that the investigation is closed," the dean continued. "No further action will be taken." Kendrick stared at him. "Will a statement be issued?" The dean blinked, then offered a tight, diplomatic smile. "I don't think a public statement is necessary at this stage. We prefer to resolve these matters internally, to avoid reputational damage." He didn't specify whose reputation. Kendrick's hands clenched at his sides. He knew better than to push further. In this room, fairness had an expiration date, and it had passed. The next morning, Kendrick entered room 204 to the same cold air and tightly folded faces. Claiborne didn't mention the investigation. He didn't acknowledge Kendrick at all. He launched into his lecture as if the last 2 weeks had never happened, as if Kendrick hadn't been humiliated, accused, and interrogated, as if the class hadn't laughed at him or whispered his name, like a punchline. Kendrick sat in the same back seat, now more alone than ever. He was cleared, but not redeemed. The students didn't say anything, but their eyes did. That's the one. The kid who got away with it. Cleared or not, he'd become something else now. A silent symbol of suspicion. Cheater. Not because he was guilty, but because the system had needed him to be. And even when it couldn't prove it, it refused to let go of the narrative. Still, Kendrick returned each day. He took notes, He studied. He didn't raise his hand anymore, not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew the silence made them uncomfortable. Ellen continued to meet him late at night, still teaching, still pushing. "You think surviving's the same as winning?" she asked one evening as they worked through a complex probability model. "It's not. Surviving's just step one." Kendrick looked up from his notebook. "What's step two?" "Proving you were always ahead of them." That night she didn't bring math sheets. Instead she slid a dusty binder across the table, its edges frayed, pages yellowing at the corners. "What's this?" Kendrick asked. "An old faculty archive," she said. "I found it tucked behind some alumni storage in the West Wing." He opened it. The cover page read Cambridge Undergraduate Mathematics Exam. Final. 1981. Instructor Prof. R. Claiborne, then PhD candidate. Kendrick's brow furrowed. "This is Claiborne's final." Ellen nodded. "One of the hardest exams in the university's archives. Back when he was still clawing for respect." "Why show me this?" "Because," she said, her voice low and even, "you're going to take it." Kendrick laughed. He thought she was joking, but Evelyn's face was deadly serious. "Take the same exam he did, under the same conditions. Solve it. Then let them decide if you're good enough." Kendrick stared at her, something electric stirring in his chest. "You really think I can do it?" She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "I know you can." The next night, Kendrick sat alone in one of the old seminar rooms, pages spread out before him, a stopwatch ticking quietly beside his notebook. The only light came from a desk lamp Evelyn had brought from home. No laptops, no calculators, just pen, paper, and silence. He worked for hours. Some problems were easy. Some pushed him to the brink of his limits. But he didn't stop. His focus was surgical. Every stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming something stolen. By the time he finished, the sky outside had turned deep purple. He leaned back, exhausted but alive in a way he hadn't felt in weeks. Ellen appeared in the doorway minutes later. She didn't ask how it went. She just took the completed exam and smiled. "I'm gonna have someone look at this," she said. "Who?" She paused. "Someone who doesn't know your name. Just your work." Kendrick nodded. That was enough. 2 days later, Evelyn returned with a typed document, a formal peer review of Kendrick's answers. It read, "This submission demonstrates an advanced, nuanced, and elegant grasp of higher-level mathematical reasoning. Whoever this student is, they belong not only in this program, but in academia. Possibly beyond." Kendrick read the review twice. Then again, his heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't just good enough. He was better. But no one knew. No statement had been released. No retraction issued. Claiborne still lectured like nothing had happened. Trent Willoughby still smirked when he passed Kendrick in the halls. His name still traveled like a rumor that refused to die. But Kendrick felt something shift inside him. Let them think what they wanted. He had the truth. And one day soon, so would everyone else. Ellen tapped her pen against the table and said quietly, "You know what's buried deeper in that vault? A copy of Claiborne's own exam, with the grade he got." Evelyn's words hung in the air like smoke. A copy of Claiborne's own exam, with the grade he got. Kendrick blinked slowly, barely breathing. "You're serious?" She didn't smile, didn't blink, just tapped the binder again with her pen. "I told you surviving is just the first step," she said. "This is the second." Kendrick opened the folder carefully, fingers tracing over brittle pages that had been untouched for decades. Inside was a scanned image of Claiborne's original exam submission from 1981. His handwriting crisp, deliberate, methodical. But the final page said everything. In red ink, underlined twice. Grade. Next to it, a single note, competent but lacks abstraction in final theorem. Kendrick looked up at Evelyn, stunned. "You're telling me the exam I just took and solved better was the same one Claiborne got a B on?" She nodded. But he didn't just walk away with that grade. He spun it into a career. He sold competent as elite. That's how this place works. They rebrand mediocrity when it fits the mold. Kendrick leaned back, something shifting inside his chest. It wasn't anger, not quite. It was revelation, a breaking of the illusion. "So what now?" he asked. Evelyn's eyes narrowed with purpose. "Now, we put it where they can't ignore it." Over the next week, Kendrick refined his version of the exam. He annotated every answer, clarified proofs, and added a footnote to the final theorem, the same one Claiborne had failed to extend. Kendrick pushed it further, offering a new approach using discrete modeling that hinted at potential applications in quantum computing. Ellen read it silently, her eyes scanning like a laser. When she finished, she exhaled slowly. "This isn't just a retake," she said. "This is a challenge." Kendrick said nothing. He didn't have to. They printed the exam under a pseudonym, K.M. Sorrell, a blend of Kendrick's initials and his grandfather's surname. They submitted it to a respected but tightly curated math journal known for publishing breakthrough work from independent contributors. They didn't attach a school name. They didn't name-drop Harvard. Just the work, just the math. And then they waited. 3 weeks later, Kendrick received the email while alone in the campus library. The subject line was short and cold. Accepted for publication, Journal of Applied Mathematics and Theory. He stared at it for several seconds, reading and rereading it, like it might vanish if he blinked too fast. His hands trembled. He didn't shout, didn't leap. He just closed the email slowly and smiled. Evelyn cried when he told her. "They'll never see it coming," she whispered. "Never." The journal didn't know who Kendrick was. Not really, but they knew genius when they saw it. The editor even added a personal note: "The originality and clarity of this submission stands out in our recent pool. We would be interested in future contributions." Kendrick's name began to ripple, softly, through the elite math community, forums, independent journals, and Twitter threads, dedicated to academic breakthroughs, began dissecting the mysterious K.M. Sorrell. Speculations rose. Was it a reclusive postdoc, a European prodigy, a retired genius resurfacing? No one guessed a 13-year-old black kid sitting in the back of a summer program at Harvard. And yet, while his name floated quietly among those who actually read equations, nothing changed on campus. Claiborne still called on everyone but him. Students still stepped aside like he was walking through a fog of suspicion. Trent Willoughby still tossed micro-insults like confetti. "Hey Kendrick, maybe the journal published you out of guilt. You know, like an academic apology tour." Kendrick never responded. He didn't have to. Because something more powerful than applause was beginning to bloom. The kind of validation that didn't need permission. Late one night, Evelyn pulled out a manila envelope from her satchel, sliding it across the table without a word. Kendrick opened it. Inside was a neatly typed copy of Claiborne's recent faculty review. Not confidential, but not something students typically saw. In the comments section, one line stood out: "Professor Claiborne's instruction remains rigid, lacks innovation in advanced modules." Kendrick looked up. Evelyn raised one brow. "Funny, isn't it? The man who accused you of cheating can't even evolve past his own equations." Kendrick chuckled. Not with cruelty, but with clarity. "It's not about proving him wrong anymore," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's about proving that you were always right." And then the unexpected twist. The email came on a Wednesday evening, short, direct, and carrying the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. Subject: request for meeting, alumni inquiry. From Malcolm Reese to Kendrick Miles. "Kendrick, I hope this message finds you well. I came across a piece of published math theory under the name K.M. Sorrell. Something about the logic and the elegance reminded me of a young student I once saw from Atlanta. I'm a Harvard alum, class of '99, CEO of Quantitech. I'd like to speak with you. Privately." "Malcolm." Kendrick stared at the screen, unmoving. He recognized the name. Malcolm Reese was a tech mogul, one of the most powerful black voices in artificial intelligence. Forbes, MIT guest lectures, TED Talks. Kendrick had watched him online years ago, back when the idea of being seen by someone like that felt impossible. And now Malcolm had seen him. Not because of his skin, not because of his story, because of his work. Because Kendrick had solved something Claiborne never could, and done it without permission, without a podium, without applause. He leaned back slowly in his chair, heart pounding. Everything was changing, and it had only just begun. As Kendrick read the email again, a new one arrived. This one from a restricted faculty address. The subject line read, "Urgent. Who is K.M. Sorrell? Need clarification before faculty board review." The email sat on Kendrick's screen, glowing like a signal flare in a dark sea. "I'd like to speak with you. Privately." Those words, typed by Malcolm Reese, one of the most influential black minds in the tech world, didn't feel real. For a few seconds, Kendrick just stared at it, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or show it to Evelyn. But something told him this wasn't a moment to rush. This was a turning point. The kind of twist his younger self wouldn't have dared to imagine. He forwarded the message to Evelyn, with a simple note. He knows. Her reply came within minutes. Get ready. Everything's about to change. That weekend, Kendrick boarded a quiet train from Cambridge to New York City. Malcolm's assistant had arranged everything. A private car, prepaid ticket, even a tailored suit waiting in a box at the hotel with a handwritten card. Confidence is your uniform. Kendrick barely slept the night before. He ran mental proofs in his head like lullabies, but sleep wouldn't come. Too much was shifting too fast. Too much at stake. He had no idea what to expect. But when the elevator doors opened to the 63rd floor of the sleek glass building, and Malcolm Reese stood waiting in a tailored charcoal suit, smiling like a proud uncle, Kendrick felt the ground steady beneath him. Malcolm extended a hand. You made it. Kendrick shook it, his voice quiet. Thank you for inviting me. No, Malcolm said. Thank you for reminding us who we are. Malcolm's office wasn't the kind of place built for intimidation. It was airy, sunlit, lined with bookshelves and abstract art. The windows overlooked Central Park, but nothing inside screamed ego. Instead, it whispered intention. They sat across from each other, as equals. Malcolm wasted no time.
I read your paper 3 times, he said.
By the second read, I had my CTO break it down for the team. The way you reframed that theorem, it's more than academic. It has real-world application potential. Kendrick was quiet. He still wasn't used to being seen for his mind. I didn't do it to impress anyone, Kendrick finally said. I just needed to prove I could. Malcolm nodded slowly. And that's exactly why it's dangerous. He leaned forward, his voice lower now. This place, this system, it survives on invisibility. People like Claiborne operate in the comfort of unchallenged superiority. But when someone like you steps up and doesn't just survive, but thrives, the machine panics. Kendrick swallowed. He'd lived that truth already. So here's what I'm offering, Malcolm said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were a list of names, private links, and calendar invites. I want to introduce you to what I call the Black Underground. Kendrick looked up, confused. It's a global network, Malcolm explained. Mathematicians, coders, physicists, economists, all black, all brilliant, and all working outside the traditional gatekeeper institutions. Some are tenured at Ivy Leagues. Others are freelancers building algorithms in Ghana or cryptographers in Oakland. Kendrick flipped through the folder. Names he didn't recognize but would never forget. These people, Malcolm continued, don't wait for permission. They create, they connect, and they teach the next generation, without waiting for Harvard to stamp it acceptable. You're one of them now. The weight of those words settled deep. Kendrick felt something rising, not pressure, but power. Malcolm stood. You're not just a survivor of the system anymore, Kendrick. You're a threat to it. Over the next 3 months, Kendrick's life split in two. By day, he was still the quiet student at Ivy Bridge, still overlooked, still dismissed, still treated like an anomaly. Claiborne never mentioned the paper. Trent's sneers had shifted from open mocking to silent resentment. But by night, Kendrick plugged into a world most students would never know existed. Virtual seminars hosted by black professors at MIT and Caltech. Discord servers where theorems were debated, like battle rap. Midnight Zoom sessions with a group called the Black Equation, where every participant's face was hidden, but their minds lit the screen. They gave him code names, assignments, challenges. He was solving models being used to optimize agriculture in Botswana and predict generational wealth gaps in redlined American cities. Evelyn watched quietly as he evolved. I don't recognize you anymore, she said one evening after he'd explained an economic algorithm that could forecast urban displacement within 4 miles. Kendrick grinned. That's the point. But he still hadn't told her what Malcolm said next. On Kendrick's final visit to New York before summer ended, Malcolm took him on a quiet walk through Harlem. They passed murals of black poets, jazz legends, freedom fighters. You ever wonder what would have happened, Malcolm said, if we hadn't been written out of history every time we invented something? Kendrick nodded. Sometimes I think about how many Claibornes got published, and how many Evelyns got erased. Malcolm smiled, stopping at a quiet bench under a canopy of trees. I don't want you to wait to be accepted by the world. I want you to change the world that waits for you. Then, he said it, I want you to come back to Harvard. 2 years from now. As a guest lecturer. Kendrick blinked. I'm serious, Malcolm said. We'll fund it. I'll make the calls. You've already done the work. Let them sit in a room where you're the one with the marker. You don't need tenure to teach truth. Kendrick tried to respond but couldn't. His throat closed with emotion. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once trembled at the back of Claiborne's class. Now they were being handed a future. That night, back in his dorm, Kendrick sat alone. The idea haunted him. Guest lecturer. 2 years from now, he'd be 16. Still a teenager. But standing at the same podium where he'd once been told to observe, not interrupt. It sounded impossible, but so had everything else. And slowly, the impossible was becoming his blueprint. As Kendrick turned off his laptop, a knock echoed at the door. He opened it to find a delivery envelope. No sender listed. Inside was a single photo of him and Evelyn together in a lecture room. And a typed note, "We see what you're doing. Stop before we make you disappear too." The thread inside the anonymous envelope haunted Kendrick like a shadow he couldn't shake. The message, "We see what you're doing. Stop before we make you disappear too," echoed in his mind during lectures, during meals, even during moments when he felt almost safe. It wasn't just a warning, it was a reminder he was being watched. His progress wasn't invisible, not anymore. But despite the fear, Kendrick didn't stop. He continued attending secret seminars, meeting with Malcolm, and studying under Evelyn's steady guidance. He knew caution mattered, but silence would only feed the machine that wanted him broken. Summer ended too quickly, and soon Kendrick was back in Atlanta, older, sharper, and carrying work that could change his destiny. But home had its own storms waiting. His mother hugged him tightly at the station. "You look taller," she said, stepping back to scan his face. "And tired. You okay?" "Yeah," Kendrick lied. "Just a lot of studying." But he wasn't prepared for the next voice. "Well, look at you, man. Harvard boy." Kendrick froze. Standing behind a rusted sedan was Dorian Miles. His father, a man who left years ago. A man whose promises had been as fragile as newspaper pages. A man who never came to birthdays, never sent letters, never checked on school. Now he leaned against the car like he had every right to stand there. Kendrick's mother stiffened. "You don't get to show up now." Dorian lifted both hands. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here for my son." Kendrick's mother glared at him. But Kendrick, he hesitated. As much as he wanted to put up a wall, something inside him flickered. The softness of a boy who had once waited at a window for a father who never arrived. "I'll talk to him," Kendrick said softly. His mother exhaled sharply but nodded. 5 minutes, she warned. Dorian grinned. Like victory. "Let's walk." They walked toward the abandoned basketball court near the station. Dorian moved with a casual swagger, wearing a leather jacket too warm for summer and sunglasses he didn't need. Kendrick walked beside him, guarded. "So," Dorian said, sliding his hands into his pockets. "Harvard. Damn. That's big." "It's a summer program," Kendrick corrected. "Not Harvard, Harvard." Dorian waved a hand dismissively. "Still counts. You always were smart. Got that from me." Kendrick almost laughed. "Almost. I got that from Mom." "I," Dorian conceded with a shrug. "She's got a good head. But you got something from me too." Kendrick didn't respond. Dorian stopped, turning toward him with a slow, careful expression, almost rehearsed. "Look, I messed up. I know I did. But I'm here now. I want to fix things." Kendrick didn't trust the sudden gentleness. "Why now?" Dorian sighed dramatically. "Can't a man change?" Kendrick gave him a long, cold stare. Dorian's smile flickered. All right. You want the truth? I heard about your work. I heard you're doing something big. And I want to be a part of it." Kendrick's chest tightened. "You don't even know what I'm working on. But I know it's important," Dorian said quickly. "And I know you're gonna make money. Real money. Look, I'm not asking for a lot. Just a chance. Let me help you get your ideas out there." Kendrick felt his stomach twist. A painful blend of anger and pity. "You never cared before." "That's why I care now," Dorian said. "I'm trying." Something about the way he said it too smooth, too practiced, unsettled Kendrick. He stepped back. "I'm not ready for this." Dorian's smile hardened. "You can't keep pushing me away forever."
"I can't."
And Kendrick walked off, leaving his father standing alone in the dying daylight. The next weeks passed in a fragile rhythm. Kendrick worked on new proofs, updated models for Malcolm's team, and stayed in constant contact with Evelyn. He kept his research on a password-protected drive, the only place he felt completely safe. Every night, he reviewed Malcolm's mentorship plan, the think tank notes, and the formula that had changed everything. His world was expanding, but cracks were forming in places he couldn't see. Dorian started showing up outside the house. Not every day, but often enough to unsettle Kendrick. Sometimes he just waved from his car. Other times he knocked and left before Kendrick could reach the door. His mother grew restless. "He's circling," she warned. "Be careful." Kendrick nodded. He wasn't afraid of Dorian. He was afraid of what the man wanted. He found out too late. One Wednesday, Kendrick returned home from a community library event, and something felt off the moment he stepped inside. The air was still. Too still. His laptop sat open on the dining table. Open, but the screen blacked out as if someone had closed it in a hurry. He froze. "Mom?" he called. She rushed out of the kitchen, frantic. "Baby, your father, he was here. He said he needed to talk to you. I told him to leave, but Kendrick sprinted to his room. The drawer he kept locked, the one with his research drafts, was open. Empty. His heart slammed against his ribs. No, no. His flash drives were gone. His original proof copies gone. Everything Evelyn had helped him build. Gone. Kendrick's breath became ragged. His mother gripped his shoulders. "We'll call the police." "No." Kendrick snapped, panic rising. "No. They'll ask what was stolen. They'll want details. They'll treat me like I'm making it up. They'll say it's domestic conflict. They won't understand. They'll never understand." His mother's eyes filled with tears. Kendrick sank to the floor, hands in his hair. "Why would he do this?" His mother whispered. "Because he sees value in you now. And men like him, they take before they earn." 2 days later, the news broke. Not local news. Tech news. An edtech startup named Neurospark Learning had announced a revolutionary new mathematical framework aimed at transforming digital learning platforms. The CEO stood at a podium, smiling as he described the breakthrough. The camera cut to a slide. Kendrick knew instantly what it was. His theorem, his sequence, his optimization, renamed, reformatted, but undeniably his vision disguised as theirs. Kendrick felt something inside him collapse. The betrayal wasn't just theft. It was erasure, wrapped in applause. He couldn't breathe. The company's spokesperson credited a private independent contributor from Atlanta, but refused to list a name for privacy. Kendrick didn't need to guess who that contributor was. His phone vibrated endlessly. Malcolm, Evelyn, seminar mentors, even Trent from Harvard sending a mocking screenshot. But Kendrick couldn't answer. He spent hours in his room, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything he'd built slipping out of his grip. By nightfall, the theorem had gone viral on social media. Influencers were posting deep dive videos. Professors were praising the elegance. Investors were flooding Neurospark with interest. Kendrick watched his stolen future circulate the internet. His mother sat outside his door, crying softly. But Kendrick couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't feel anything but the unbearable heaviness of invisibility. Evelyn arrived unannounced the next morning, breathless. She didn't knock. She walked straight to Kendrick's room and sat on the floor beside him. He didn't look at her. She waited. And she said softly, "Baby, what happened to you wasn't failure. It was theft." Kendrick's voice was barely audible. "I trusted him. That's why it hurts," she said. "But you listen to me now. You are not finished. You are not ruined. You are not erased. They stole your work, not your brilliance." Kendrick swallowed, jaw trembling. "What if this is it? What if everything I built is gone?" Evelyn shook her head. "You can rebuild, because the ideas came from you, and you're not done making them." He finally looked at her. "Why does it always have to be harder?" "Because you're doing something no one prepared them for. Existing in full power while being black." Her words steadied him. Slowly, painfully, Kendrick sat upright. Ellen put a hand on his shoulder. "Get up. We have work to do." That afternoon, news broke that Neurospark had presented Kendrick's stolen theorem at a major tech conference, and the clip had just hit 1 million views. Kendrick had always believed numbers couldn't lie. But now, watching his stolen theorem headline a global tech conference, in someone else's voice, under someone else's name, he realized something far more dangerous. Truth could be stolen too. The video clip of Neurospark's CEO presenting Kendrick's work had crossed 1 million views in under 24 hours. Analysts on LinkedIn called it the future of math education. Professors tweeted praise for its unique symmetry. Financial blogs speculated on billion-dollar implications. Not once was Kendrick's name mentioned. He sat silently in his room, hands clenched, heart numb. Ellen stood behind him, watching the screen darken after the clip ended. "This is war," she said quietly. But Kendrick wasn't angry anymore. He was something colder, resolved. Malcolm called that night, voice tight with urgency. "We're moving," he said. "My legal team's already drafting the papers, but this has to be airtight." Kendrick didn't speak. Malcolm continued. "They can deny they stole your files, but they can't deny the math came from somewhere. And I've got a feeling someone inside that company knows it." He was right. Less than 48 hours later, it happened. A burner Twitter account, no profile picture, no bio, posted a single PDF titled, "Proof of Authorship Kendrick Miles, 13, Atlanta." Attached were metadata files from the original documents Kendrick had stored months earlier. Timestamps, edit logs, even versions of equations still in draft form. All cross-verified, all digitally traceable. And on the last page, a photo. A picture of Kendrick in a Harvard classroom, hunched over a notebook with Evelyn by his side, date stamped. It was undeniable. The post exploded. Within 3 hours, it hit 50,000 retweets. Then came the hashtag, Stolen Genius. What started as a whisper on Twitter turned into a storm. By morning it was trending globally. Screenshots of Kendrick's original math, side by side with the presentation slides from NeuroSpark, flooded the internet. Influencers who'd praised the tech company now backpedaled. Black Twitter turned furious. Journalists reached out. Think pieces emerged on stolen black brilliance, exploitation of underage talent, and systemic erasure. Kendrick woke up to thousands of messages. Some praised him. Some apologized for not seeing him sooner. But Kendrick didn't want apologies. He wanted justice. Malcolm's team acted fast. A lawsuit was filed within 24 hours, in federal court. Intellectual property theft, exploitation of a minor, and defamation by omission. Kendrick's name was formally attached to the theorem. His status as the original creator was now public record. And still the media swarmed. They didn't want the math. They wanted the narrative. CNN called it the biggest academic theft scandal of the decade. The New York Times ran a profile titled "The Boy Who Solved Equations" and got erased. BuzzFeed launched an exposé called "Genius Interrupted." Kendrick's photo was everywhere. The boy in the back row. The prodigy who was told to be quiet. The ghostwriter of $1 million idea. But something in all the noise felt off. The world had turned Kendrick into a symbol, but not the one he'd asked for. They called him the black genius who beat the system. They didn't see the pain. They didn't see Evelyn crying in the background. They didn't see his hands shaking at night when he thought about Dorian. They didn't see the cost. One afternoon, Kendrick sat in Evelyn's small kitchen, surrounded by stacked mail, half-empty tea mugs, and silence. "They're calling me a hero," he muttered. Evelyn poured him tea, her movements slow and deliberate. Because they're more comfortable praising survivors than confronting what made them victims. Kendrick stared down at the mug. "They want the story, not the truth." She nodded. "But you don't owe them either." He looked up. "So what do I do now?" Evelyn paused, then slid a folded letter across the table. Kendrick opened it slowly. It was on Harvard letterhead. "Mr. Kendrick Miles, we at the Ivy Bridge Summer Scholars Program acknowledge recent developments involving your work in the resulting public discourse. In light of your unique perspective, we invite you to return to campus for our Fall Equity Symposium, not as a student, but as a featured speaker. Topic: Reimagining Inclusion in Elite Education. We hope you'll consider sharing your experience to help us grow. Respectfully, Dean Harris." Kendrick set the letter down. "Not as a student," he whispered. "As a speaker." Elliman raised an eyebrow. "You gonna do it?" He didn't answer. Not yet. Because in the back of his mind, something still didn't sit right. A message, buried inside all this praise. Something the world wasn't asking. What happens after the hashtags fade? As Kendrick stared at the invitation, his inbox lit up again. This time from Professor Claiborne. The subject line read, "Are you return? I have conditions. 2 years." That's how long it had been since Kendrick Miles sat in the back of room 204, silenced by a single glance and dismissed with 5 words, "Observe, don't interrupt." The back. Now 2 years later, he walked down the same hallway, not as a student, but as a guest lecturer. The laminated badge clipped to his suit coat was unmistakable. Gust faculty, Lecturer Kendrick Miles. He wore it like armor. The marble floors of Jefferson Hall hadn't changed. The wood-paneled walls still carried the same ancestral portraits of dead white men in powdered wigs, looking down like judges from another century. But Kendrick's posture had changed. His gait, his presence. He wasn't walking in hoping to be seen. He was the moment. Inside room 204, chairs were arranged in neat rows. The same chairs that once boxed him in. The same blackboard polished now. The same lectern where Claiborne once ignored his raised hand. His answers, his existence. But today, Kendrick was at the front. Malcolm stood near the back row, arms folded. A small smile played across his lips. He had pulled every string, made every call, and moved every silent mountain to make this day happen. It wasn't just a victory for Kendrick. It was a reckoning. Ellen stood in the corner quietly, dressed in deep navy, her locks wrapped neatly. She hadn't wanted to come, but Kendrick insisted. "You started this," he told her. "You deserve to see it land." She didn't argue. Outside the room, students and faculty gathered quickly, whispering as they entered. Some were genuinely curious. Some were there to spectate controversy. Others just wanted to see the boy who had gone from accused cheater to published mathematician. A living hashtag made flesh. And then came the last figure through the door. Professor Reginald Claiborne. Gray hair sharper, posture unchanged, bow tie flawless. He entered without looking directly at Kendrick, as if refusing to acknowledge his transformation might undo it. But he saw the badge, saw the suit, saw the placement of Kendrick behind the podium, the very space Claiborne once denied him. He took a seat in the third row, flanked by two younger professors. Kendrick didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just waited until the last of the murmurs died down. Then he stepped forward. His voice cut through the tension like a blade honed over years of silence. "Good morning," he said. "I'm Kendrick Miles. I'm here today not to talk about what happened then, but about what's happening now." Some students leaned forward. Others took out phones. Cameras clicked, quietly but constantly. Kendrick continued. "When I first sat in this room, I was told to observe, not contribute. I was told I didn't belong." He let the words settle. But numbers don't care who speaks them, and equations don't care about legacy. A few heads nodded. "I came back to this room today for one reason," he said, lifting the marker and turning to the board. In smooth strokes he wrote, "Advanced Calculus in the Language of Survival." The room went silent. Malcolm sat up straighter. Ellen exhaled, her eyes glassy. Kendrick underlined the title once, then turned back to the crowd. "Survival," he said, "isn't just a biological act. It's mathematical. It's calculated. It's about navigating systems, social, educational, economic, that weren't designed for your existence. It's about resilience coded into every decision you make." He paused. "And today we're going to examine how calculus, a language of change, mirrors the lives of people who've been told to remain still." Gasps, soft but audible, rippled across the room. Kendrick smiled, but just slightly. Claiborne remained still. No note-taking, no expression. But Kendrick saw the way his fingers tightened over his pen. The silence held for a beat too long. Kendrick turned back to the board and began to write again. But this time, he didn't use numbers. He started with a name, a forgotten one, and said, "Let's begin with a proof they erased from this university's archives. 30 years ago. Written by Dr. Evelyn Rhodes." The room didn't move. Not a shuffle. Not a breath out of place. As Kendrick wrote the name Dr. Evelyn Rhodes in thick black strokes across the board, a stunned silence followed. He could feel the weight of 1,000 unspoken things behind him. Reputations, regrets, resistance. He turned slowly, meeting the crowd with steady eyes. "Before we get into equations," Kendrick said, "we need to acknowledge the ones erased." He stepped aside so everyone could see the name behind him clearly. This university denied Dr. Evelyn Rhodes tenure over 30 years ago. Not because her math was lacking. Her work in applied differentials is still cited in niche circles, but because she didn't fit the image of who should be doing mathematics. His voice was calm, but every syllable carved through the room like a scalpel. "I would not be standing here if not for her. And you wouldn't be sitting here now if you hadn't been part of the silence that let her vanish." In the third row, Claiborne sat frozen, eyes fixed somewhere just above Kendrick's head. His hands were neatly clasped in his lap, but Kendrick could see the strain in his jaw, the tightness in his shoulders. "I'm not here to shame anyone," Kendrick continued. "Shame doesn't change systems, but truth Truth rearranges the room. He walked back to the board, erased the name, and began drawing a curve. A survival curve, annotated with terms like resilience drop-off, legacy bias, inflection, and opportunity threshold. This is not just a graph, he said, pointing to the curve. It's a pattern, one repeated in nearly every system built to determine who succeeds and who survives. Heads tilted, notebooks opened. Phones were no longer recording. Most had been set down, forgotten, in favor of something far more urgent, listening. Kendrick launched into a proof derived from one of Evelyn's lost theorems, now renamed the Rhodes function. It modeled not just rate of change, but rate of resistance, how systems push back against progress, depending on race, income, and educational access. He layered it with real data from housing redlining, standardized test disparities, and access to advanced placement programs. This isn't symbolic, he said. This is math. His tone sharpened, and the numbers don't lie. But they do disappear when they don't fit the story. He paused. Let the silence settle. Then he walked to the sideboard and began another set of equations, ones based on his own work with Malcolm's think tank. He showed how adaptive calculus could predict not just economic trends, but also how long it would take a black student from an underfunded public school to catch up to a legacy student given a 10-year head start.
Answer?
Kendrick said. They don't. Not without burning themselves down first. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some students stared slack-jawed. One girl covered her mouth. Claiborne still didn't move. But Kendrick saw it. The slight shift in his eyes. The tightening around his temples. This wasn't just a lecture anymore. It was a reckoning. Then Kendrick did something no one expected. He pulled out a photo. Held it up. This is me. Age 13. Back of this room. I had just been told to sit down and observe. I wasn't late. I wasn't loud. I was just black. He let the photo circulate. You don't know how much math lives in that silence. How many equations were crushed under the weight of that moment. Then he added softly, but I'm still here. No one dared move. He paced slowly to the front of the room. Survival isn't just breath. It's precision, strategy, optimization. We, black minds, black bodies, we are the unspoken variable in every equation. The silent denominator. He stepped closer to the audience. And I'm here today to rewrite the problem. He finished with a final board full of derivatives, each labeled after survival tactics, code switching, cultural masking, hypercompetence. Then, in a new color, he circled them all and wrote, mathematical armor. He stepped back. No clap.
No cough.
Just stillness. Then a voice broke the tension. A woman, older, firm, stood in the back row. Her gray hair was tied back, and her suit carried the quiet power of tenure. It was Professor Elaine Whitmore, chair of the math department. She took one step forward and said, Mr. Miles. Everyone turned to look. She continued, voice even. Would you be willing to repeat this lecture next semester permanently? Gasps echoed. Softly. Claiborne's hands fell from his lap. Kendrick met her eyes. And for the first time that hour, he smiled. Before he could respond, a young student in the second row raised her hand and asked, Is Dr. Evelyn Rhodes still alive? Because I want to learn from her too. The silence that followed Professor Elaine Whitmore's request stretched impossibly long, not out of doubt, but reverence. Would Kendrick return next semester as a lecturer? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked across the room, at the students whose faces had transformed during the lecture, at Evelyn, who stood straighter than ever, her chin trembling behind a composed smile, at Malcolm, who leaned against the wall like a general watching a battle he already knew would end in victory. And then his eyes landed on Claiborne, still seated, still. But something inside the man had cracked. Kendrick could see it in the way his eyes no longer rested on the blackboard, or Kendrick, but instead stared downward, fixed on the empty desk in front of him. He hadn't taken a single note, hadn't said a single word, hadn't once looked Kendrick in the eye. And now he was slowly, carefully packing his satchel. Kendrick's voice broke through the tension, calm and precise. I'd be honored to teach here, but only if the course is named after the one who taught me first. He turned, writing on the board once more in firm strokes. The Evelyn Rhodes Lectureship in Survival Mathematics. There was a moment of disbelief, and then it happened. One clap, then another.
Then a chorus.
It started hesitantly, like people unsure if they were allowed to celebrate what had just happened. But within seconds, the room stood. Every student, every guest. even the assistant professors who had once defended Claiborne's silence. They clapped not just for Kendrick's mind, but for the fight behind it, for the years he carried shame he never earned, for the brilliance buried by whispers, for the girl who had asked if Evelyn was still alive, not to meet a hero, but to be taught by one. The applause surged like a tidal wave, swallowing the last remnants of resistance. Evelyn's eyes filled slowly. She didn't sob. She didn't tremble. She just wiped one tear as it escaped, and whispered to herself, "They're finally listening." As the ovation continued, Kendrick didn't smile. He didn't bow. He stood steady, not because he needed the applause, but because the weight that once bent him forward had finally shifted. For the first time, the weight of Harvard's silence was no longer on his shoulders. It was on theirs. Claiborne stood quietly, his face unreadable. He didn't acknowledge the applause. He didn't stay for questions. He slipped out the side door, quietly, intentionally, already erasing himself from the history unfolding inside room 2. No cameras followed him. No students stopped him. No one noticed he was gone. Except Kendrick. And Kendrick let him go. Not out of forgiveness, but because he knew this wasn't Claiborne's story anymore. After the room emptied, Kendrick stepped outside into the brisk evening air. Evelyn joined him, her hands still holding the photo of her 30-year-old proof that Kendrick had referenced. She looked up at him, her voice soft. "You changed the rules today." "No," Kendrick said. "I just proved we were playing by different ones all along." They shared a quiet moment. And then Malcolm approached, his coat draped over one shoulder, phone still buzzing in his pocket from the hundreds of messages lighting up. He stood beside Kendrick and spoke low, so only he could hear. "They'll give you anything now. Tenure, departmental leadership, your name in brochures." Kendrick stayed silent. Malcolm leaned in, eyes sharp with vision. "But why take their table when you can build your own?" Kendrick turned to him, confused. Malcolm smiled. "Let's build your own university." Before Kendrick could respond, a security guard approached holding an envelope. "This was just dropped off for you. No return name, but it's addressed in Professor Claiborne's handwriting." The envelope was thick, the kind that didn't just carry a message, but a memory. Kendrick turned it over slowly. His name was written in cursive, the ink slightly smudged, and the handwriting, unmistakably Claiborne, sent a strange chill crawling up his spine. He opened it carefully, unsure what he expected. But inside was not a letter. It was a single sheet of blank paper, except for one typed sentence at the center. History has a way of documenting itself, especially when others refuse to. No signature, no context, just those 14 words. He didn't show it to Evelyn. He didn't mention it to Malcolm. He simply folded it once, tucked it into the back of his notebook, and went about his day. But by the following Monday, history began documenting itself. Just as promised. It started with a knock on the door of the faculty administrative office. A white envelope. No stamp. No return address. Inside 37 printed pages, typed, formatted, footnoted, and indexed like a legal brief. The title on the first page read, "A Timeline of Institutional Racism and Targeted Harassment, Kendrick Miles Ivy Bridge Program." The letter, unsigned, was addressed to the Harvard Dean's Office, CC'd to the Board of Trustees, the Diversity Office, the Ivy Bridge Program Coordinator, and tenured faculty within the Mathematics Department. It was meticulous. Each section documented a specific incident, dates, names, exact quotes. Page 5 detailed the day Claiborne told Kendrick to sit in the back. Page 11 outlined the whisper campaign about Kendrick's diversity admission. Page 15 cited the internal faculty email, joking about affirmative action math, including a screenshot of Claiborne's laughing emoji response. There were transcribed student testimonies, anonymous statements from teaching assistants, even time logs showing which faculty ignored Kendrick's questions during seminars. It wasn't just an accusation. It was an indictment, and whoever wrote it had access. Deep access. By noon, the letter had been copied and quietly passed among faculty in boxes. By 2 hours in PM, a PDF leaked to student forums. By dinner time, it hit Twitter, then Reddit, then every major Ivy League student newspaper. The response was immediate. Students organized walkouts. Posters appeared outside Claiborne's classroom. "We won't learn from liars. Accountability looks like resignation. Math without justice is still injustice." Kendrick watched it unfold without saying a word. He had not written the letter. He hadn't asked for any of it, but it was happening, And for the first time, not in whispers, but thunder. The administration tried to contain the fire. They released a vague statement. We are aware of recent allegations and are committed to an ongoing investigation. But students weren't interested in ongoing. They wanted outcomes. They gathered outside Claiborne's lectures, holding signs, chanting Kendrick's name. They posted side-by-side screenshots of Claiborne's past lectures with captions like, Gatekeeper of Greatness, or Guardian of Ghosts. More faculty began to distance themselves. Some quietly deleted tweets praising Claiborne's methods. Others publicly called for accountability. But the most shocking move came from inside the math department itself. Professor Elaine Whitmore, the same woman who had asked Kendrick to return, called an emergency meeting and proposed the unthinkable. Reopen Claiborne's tenure review. The room had fallen silent. Tenure, once granted, was rarely questioned. It was supposed to be sacred, untouchable. But so was the truth. Whitmore's proposal passed by a narrow vote. Claiborne was officially under review. During this time, Kendrick stayed quiet. He didn't post, didn't comment, didn't retweet. He spent most of his time off campus, working with Malcolm on early blueprints for the university they dreamed of, one not bound by old stone, but built for students like him and mentors like Evelyn. But deep down, he knew something unfinished still lingered. Not vengeance, not punishment, closure. That's what was missing. The moment where the institution looked him in the eye and said, "We failed you." That moment arrived one cold Thursday morning, hidden among dozens of unread emails. Subject: We owe you a public apology. As Kendrick clicked open the email, his eyes locked on the sender's name. Not Harvard, not the dean, not Claiborne, but a retired faculty member he had never met, Dr. William Langston, Claiborne's former mentor. The email from Dr. William Langston was short, only 4 lines. Mr. Miles, there are moments when truth demands to be spoken, not whispered. Tomorrow, the university will finally speak it, and it's because of you. I hope you'll attend. W. At first, Kendrick didn't know what to make of it. He reread it twice, then forwarded it to Malcolm, who replied with a single word, finally. That night, Kendrick didn't sleep. He sat with Evelyn at her kitchen table, her old tea kettle whistling softly in the background, while the news broke across the Ivy League community. Harvard University to hold historic press conference addressing allegations of systemic academic racism. Reporters speculated. Social media buzzed. Claiborne's name trended on Twitter next to Kendrick's. Think pieces flooded the timeline, most of them beginning with the same words. 2 years ago, Kendrick Miles was told to sit in the back, but tomorrow, there would be no back row. The next morning, beneath a gray New England sky, cameras crowded the front steps of Widener Hall. A podium had been placed beneath the arched stone entrance. A crimson banner fluttered gently in the cold breeze. Faculty, students, alumni, and press filled the square like witnesses waiting for verdicts. Kendrick arrived quietly, flanked by Evelyn and Malcolm. He wore no suit, no tie, just the same black coat he'd worn the day Claiborne ignored his raised hand. A quiet nod to the moment that started it all. Evelyn's hand rested lightly on his arm. Don't flinch, she whispered. Let them look you in the eye now. At 10 a.m. sharp, Dean Harris stepped to the podium. He looked older, smaller, like someone who'd spent the past few weeks inside a truth that didn't love him back. He began. Today, he said, Harvard acknowledges its silence. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. The dean didn't read from a script. His voice shook in places, but his words didn't falter. We failed to protect a student who should have been celebrated. We allowed bias to masquerade as rigor. We watched a mind be dismissed, doubted, and dismissed again, not because he lacked brilliance, but because we lacked courage. Cameras flashed. Some students gasped softly. This institution, he continued, has benefited for too long from selective excellence. But excellence means nothing if it isn't equitable. Then he turned, literally, and faced Kendrick. You, Mr. Miles, deserved better. And to you, we say, we're sorry. The silence that followed was unlike any Kendrick had ever known. It wasn't oppressive. It was sacred. Evelyn's hand squeezed his gently. The dean then turned back to the podium. We also recognize the contributions of Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, whose work, mentorship, and scholarship were denied a rightful place in this institution's history. Today we honor her publicly. He gestured behind him. A curtain dropped, revealing a new brass plaque affixed to the entrance wall.
The Rhodes Room.
dedicated to Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, mathematician, educator, visionary. Truth does not whisper. It withstands. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The crowd erupted. Kendrick looked at her, tears welling in her eyes, mouth trembling with disbelief. She didn't cry loudly, but in that moment, Kendrick knew. This was her justice. The press conference ended, but the ripple effects did not. Within an hour, Claiborne released a statement through the university. I resign from my tenured position, effective immediately. My departure is rooted not in guilt, but philosophical difference. I believe in rigor. The university, it seems, believes in revisionism. It was the ending everyone expected, the kind that offered no remorse, only retreat. But Kendrick didn't respond. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, Kendrick was invited to a private meeting with the board of trustees. They offered him titles, honorary professorship, early faculty appointment, even his own named lecture series. He declined them all. Instead, he stood before them and said, "You don't have to name things after me. You just have to fund what I believe in." Then he handed them a proposal. The Miles Rhodes Fellowship, a scholarship for underrepresented Black mathematicians, focused on funding students from overlooked high schools, offering not just tuition but mentorship, resources, and access to research grants. No gates, no legacy admissions, no silent sabotage, just access. The board approved it unanimously. Kendrick walked out of the meeting, with nothing in his name, and everything in his hands. That evening, as the sky darkened and the crowds faded, Kendrick stood alone, inside room 204. The chairs had been rearranged. The dust cleared. The blackboard wiped clean. He ran his fingers along the edge of the old desk where he once sat, exiled to the back row. He didn't feel anger, just distance. The distance between who he was and who he became. The door creaked open behind him. He turned. It was a student, young, nervous, holding a copy of the student paper with Kendrick's face on the cover. She paused. Mr. Miles? Kendrick raised his eyebrows. I was just wondering. She fidgeted with her sleeve. Are you teaching again next semester? Kendrick opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, Evelyn entered behind the student, holding a course proposal titled Resilience and Reason, the Mathematics of Liberation. The semester began with Frost still clinging to the stone steps of Harvard's East Wing. But inside room 204, the air was alive, humming with anticipation, energy, and something rare in an institution so old, renewal. Kendrick Miles stood at the front of the lecture hall, this time not as a visitor, not as a guest, not even as a name trending online, but as a full-time faculty member. The course title on the screen behind him read in bold serif, Resilience and Reason, the Mathematics of Liberation. The class was packed, over-enrolled 3 times. The waiting list had students from departments far beyond mathematics, sociology majors, philosophy students, education fellows. Word had spread that Kendrick's lectures didn't just teach numbers, they taught narrative, that they stitched survival into logic, and justice into every formula. But it wasn't the crowd size that changed things. It was the front row. For the first time, it was filled with students of color. Young minds who once sat in back corners of classrooms, now leaning forward with open notebooks, wide eyes, and the unmistakable spark of being seen. Kendrick scanned their faces before beginning. This course, he said, isn't about math as you've been taught it. It's about the math that lives inside us. The equations we've used to survive institutions that never solved for us. The patterns we've been forced to bend, and the ones we now get to write. A wave of quiet settled. Then he wrote the first equation. Survival via resilience plus resistance. Silence. He turned and smiled. Let's solve for liberation. By week 4, Resilience and Reason became Harvard's most demanded elective. Students camped out for a seat. Journalists tried to sit in. Even some faculty began to reshape their own courses in response to Kendrick's curriculum. But he wasn't chasing popularity. He was building legacy.
And Malcolm? He was building infrastructure.
With a $25 million grant, Malcolm launched the Miles Institute for Mathematical Justice, a fully funded, fully independent research and teaching center located just off Harvard's campus. Kendrick was its founding director. The institute's mission was clear: to develop mathematical frameworks that disrupted institutional bias, modeled systemic inequality, and empowered marginalized voices through quantitative truth. It was revolutionary. And Kendrick staffed it with thinkers who had never before been invited to the academic table. Black scholars from community colleges, underfunded high schools, even autodidacts with no formal degrees but undeniable genius. And seated quietly beside them was Evelyn Rhodes. Though now retired, she remained the Institute's honorary fellow. At the opening ceremony, Malcolm lifted the mic and said, "They locked brilliance in a broom closet for 30 years. Kendrick handed her the keys. Ellen smiled, but only said, "I just reminded him where to aim his mind." Kendrick's office in the Institute bore a plaque. Professor Kendrick Miles, Rhodes Fellow in Liberation Mathematics. Beneath it, engraved in brass, in honor of Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, who taught in silence until the world listened. She cried when she saw it, but this time she let herself. Inside room 204, everything had changed. The color of the seats, the faces in the front row, the energy. But Kendrick never forgot. One morning, he arrived early, long before class began. The lights were off, the chalk dust still hovered faintly in the quiet. He walked to the very back row, the same seat Claiborne had once forced him into. He sat down, let the weight of memory settle on his shoulders. Then he stood up and erased it. Now, every semester Kendrick opens his first lecture the same way. He doesn't begin with numbers. He begins with a story. "My name is Kendrick Miles. I was once told to sit in the back. But I'm standing here today to tell you, we don't do back rows anymore." And every time he says it, students rise from their seats. And somewhere, Evelyn smiles. The final week of the semester arrived quietly. Snow dusted the windowsills. Inside, students presented their final projects. Mathematical models, analyzing gentrification, algorithmic bias in standardized testing, and predictive equity frameworks for public policy. Kendrick watched proudly from the front. After class, he lingered in the doorway, packing his notes, when the door creaked open behind him. A small frame stood hesitantly at the entrance. A new student, maybe 13, maybe 14, black hoodie, backpack too big, eyes full of worry and wonder. Kendrick recognized that look. It was the same one he had carried into this room 2 years ago. The boy shifted nervously. "I think I'm in the wrong room." Kendrick smiled gently. "What class you looking for?" The boy shrugged. "Something about calculus. I don't know. They said there's this teacher here that explains it different." Kendrick nodded. "Well, you're in the right place." He walked toward the boy, gestured with a sweep of his hand. "You can take a seat," he said. "Anywhere you want." The boy hovered near the middle, but Kendrick stopped him, gently, firmly, then pointed to the front row. "No," he said, "right there. That seat's open." The boy nodded slowly and moved forward. But as Kendrick turned back to his podium, he noticed something. The boy's notebook bore the initials DM, and Kendrick froze, realizing it was Dorian's son, his half-brother. Some scars don't bleed. They sit in silence, in classrooms, courtrooms, and conversations never had. But every time someone stands up, every time a back row becomes a front seat, the story shifts. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated, this story was for you. Type yes if you believe no one should ever be told to know their place. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes.